Greetings. It's Monday, March the 24th, 2025. I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is the Monday Morning Report. Well, there are many big stories this week, but probably the one that's most talked about is the release of the JFK files. Yes, all of the files, or at least most of all of the files, depending on what you believe and where they're coming from, all the files pertaining to the JFK assassination of November 22nd, 1963. This reporter decided to go through a fair amount of them. And the first thing I noticed, which other people noticed, is that the Social Security numbers were not redacted. Well, the thinking probably was that anyone around back in 1963, they wouldn't need their Social Security number anymore. They're all gone. But no, in the late 70s, we had the congressional hearings on assassination. Remember the special committee on that? Well, a lot of those people are still around. There are many researchers who were quite young at the time that are just about now retiring. And I spent a fair amount of time going through payroll records with Social Security numbers and dates of birth, and that's all out there. Wow. Really? What does that have to do with anything? Well, that was a boo-boo. Every conspiracy theory out there seems to be claiming they're vindicated, but I haven't seen that yet. Again, there's tens of thousands of pages of this stuff. It's going to take a while for people to go through it, but a random check will see some interesting things. But realistically, there's a lot of stuff there that shouldn't be out there. In fact, I found one memo pertaining to operations in Cuba. It's no news that we tried to kill Fidel Castro, by the way, Operation Mongoose. That's long been known. But there was an operative, an agent called Ambunny 1, I saw in one memo, and based on the description of this individual, it wouldn't be too difficult to find out who she was or still is. And she apparently was operating in Cuba. Well, the Cubans are pretty vindictive. Most communists are. I mean, the Cubans can be vindictive sort of like the North Koreans are. They go after family members or descendants. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff here that is interesting and maybe should be out there, but there's a lot of stuff that maybe should have been kept quiet for a while longer. The Social Security numbers, that was just not excusable, because there are some people that are still around, and a lot of them are elderly, and they have nest eggs, and now you have all sorts of internet fraud that could be perpetrated against them, and that wasn't worth it. But there are some things in there that are important to point out. First off, how sleazy and absolutely nearly subhuman the CIA has been in its history. That's what I always find interesting about people that talk about the so-called greatest generation. This was them. They weren't so great. Sorry. I'm technically a baby boomer, even though I came at the end of that generation, and I can say with some authority that not all of them were angels. They weren't all a bunch of heroes. They were just caught up in the times they were caught up in. Don't attribute superhuman powers to people who were far less than superhuman. No, there was some very nasty stuff that went on back then. I'm sure it's going to be interesting reading, but realistically, there's no evidence whatsoever, in spite of allegations or claims people make that bullets were found and put on stretchers and all sorts of things, that there's no evidence that anyone except Lee Harvey Oswald shot John F. Kennedy. I mean, we could be open to be wrong, but there's really nothing new there in that department, at least that I saw. You're not going to find a memo that says, let's get this guy Oswald set up so that we can kill Kennedy. You're not going to see that. That sort of stuff is, they call it a nod and a wink. You don't see any paper records to that regard. Worst came to worse, it would have probably been quite likely that you're dealing with a set of incompetent people, not only at the CIA, but the FBI and the Secret Service. Kind of like what happened at 9/11. You had three intelligence agencies that weren't talking to each other, because if it was known that a man who had defected to Russia and was considered a nutcase by the KGB and the American intelligence community, and he would be allowed to be in an open window with a gun, that would have, they weren't doing their jobs. Whether they were not doing their jobs and allowed it to pass, knowing something might happen, well, that might be possible, but don't put off to clever activity what you can more likely put off to stupid incapability. Well, we'll see how that goes, but it's kind of nice, though, to see the U.S. government coming clean on something, or at least trying to. I'd love to see other files declassified and poured out to the American people. While we're on that topic, why don't we, say, declassify all the Benghazi files? I'm sure that would prove interesting to see what President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton were thinking. Yeah, that could probably damage us, but we're already pretty damaged. Let's go back in time a little bit. Let's declassify all the Roswell files. Let's see what that was really all about. If there were extraterrestrials, well, maybe we should know about it by now, unless they're running the show or something. Or if it was just one big Cold War screw-up, well, there's nothing to hide. I mean, weather balloons from the 1940s? Is that high-tech at this point? Let's see all those files declassified. Or how about the files on the USS Liberty incident in 1967, where Israel supposedly accidentally attacked an American spy ship and killed a bunch of American sailors? Rather brutally. I'd love to see the files on that incident declassified. That would be interesting. One thing I do want to point out, though, about the Kennedy release we have learned, speaking of Israel, is that John F. Kennedy did not want Israel to have a nuclear weapon. That is now quite clear. And after he disappeared, well, Lyndon Johnson saw to it that they got one. Just remember something. Just because somebody benefited from a death doesn't mean they had a hand in it. That's an important thing to keep in mind. Really, I know, because I've had that experience in my life where someone very close to me was killed and a lot of people benefited from it, but there was no evidence that there was a hit. So just keep in mind that this stuff is raw data and it has to be analyzed and looked at. And you have to get past all the pay slips, all the letters of resignation or hiring letters or welcome aboard to these various committees and things like that, and spend some time kind of going through it. But realistically, it's going to be a while before we ever know the whole story, and we probably never will. Just accept it as something, as a mystery of history. Oh, and the Epstein files? Have they been declassified yet? Have they been released? No, they haven't. I guess they're too busy retracting information for national security reasons. Yeah, we hear that a lot, don't we? No arrests yet either. I haven't heard of the FBI rounding up any people that were molesting children on Mr. Epstein's island. Stay tuned for that one. Now, speaking of the elite and insanity in the United States, leftist people are going insane. And it's not just the Tesla terror attacks that continue. By the way, Teslas have cameras on them, and from what I understand, Mr. Musk has ordered all of them switched on at his company's expense. A Tesla, by the way, has a lot of services that you can turn on and off, that you subscribe to. I found out about that recently and found it fascinating. So all these cameras are on, so if you're some silly little liberal who doesn't like Mr. Trump and you get caught vandalizing one of these things, you're looking at domestic terror charges, which is what they're coming up with now. But that's just the tip of the very messy leftist iceberg. They're talking about AOC as a presidential candidate? Really? Really? Her. You can't make this up. Maybe you wish you could. At least think of it as a bad dream. Lots of people are protesting. What are they protesting? An end to corruption? An end to waste so more money could go in their pockets or be applied to something much more constructive than these bizarre and ultra-strange programs that the U.S. government has been funding for years and years, and money going into the pockets of our leaders. There's been several reports of money going into the pockets of, well, I'm not going to go into the details there because there's just so much misinformation flying around. And to be fair, much of it is coming from the so-called new media. They're talking about allegations. Allegations are allegations. They're not facts. But there's obviously an awful lot of smoke here, and it's going to take a while before we can see the extent of the fire damage. But the hatred being shown towards Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and everyone who is basically applauding them, this is way beyond anything that we've seen in recent American history. It was not this bad in the 1960s. There seems to be paid organizations that are putting all this together. You don't just have a bunch of people show up protesting, what, keeping corrupt elite in power? There's a lot going on behind the scenes. But the thing that is most scary, the thing that is actually quite terrifying, is that there are people on social media who are recording themselves saying they want to see the president killed or Elon Musk killed, or people put to death or shot, or, they're calling for violence. And there are people shooting guns into Tesla dealerships. So far, I have not heard any report of anyone being killed. Thank goodness. But that's going to happen. That's going to start. Somebody is going to approach someone in their vehicle, they're going to pull a gun, and someone else is going to pull a gun, and it's going to go bad. This is the lies and insanity the left have been pushing in this country. Just the other night, Senator Chuck Schumer said in an interview that during the Charlottesville protests back in 2017, there was a synagogue that was threatened. That is not true. That did not happen. Didn't happen. He said it did. People are going to think it did, and it didn't happen. This is the level of lies that are being put out there and are not being challenged by the mainstream media, and in some cases by the alternative media or the new media, whatever you want to call it. If somebody goes out and says a lie often enough, people are going to take it as a truth. The National Socialists in Germany knew that. At least that's a comment that was attributed to them. There are many people calling for violence, and as the weather warms up, there's a higher and higher likelihood that that violence could turn real. The Secret Service and the FBI, already busy with all sorts of things, they probably don't have the manpower to chase up all these threats. And all you need is one crazy person who has spent much of his or her life behind a computer screen in mother's basement, what they call a keyboard Rambo. All you need is for them to get their hands on a weapon, decide that life is not worth living anymore, because in many cases with these people it isn't, and go out and do something. Maybe against a political leader, maybe against some people down the street wearing red Trump hats. This is not coming from what we call the MAGA movement. This is coming from the leftist Marxist establishment that is corrupt as can be. And they are scared. And all of their blind, stupid followers that watch their networks and listen to their reports, they're the pawns. And these people want violence because there's no other alternative. The mummy is being unraveled. They're being found out for the criminals they are. They have stolen our money, they've stolen our treasure, and they have spilled our blood, and that is their end. An army of orange jumpsuits is in the future if they lose, and they know it. Like it or not, the Second American Civil War seems to be closer on the horizon than any of the sane people in this country would like to think. This is going to be a pretty hot summer. So if you are leaning towards what we call the left or the liberalism, which it's not anymore, please look in the mirror and check yourself out. Because you're heading into a direction that you don't want to head us into. Once the blood starts to flow over this sort of insanity, it doesn't get stopped very easily. And nobody would like that better than the enemies of the United States, which will not stand by and just watch and eat popcorn. If you claim to care about this country and its people, roll it back and start acting like the adults you claim to be. Speaking of war and conflict, it still continues in Ukraine. The same old there. The European governments still seem to want that war to continue. Why, I have no clue. They want to spend all their money on weapons. That's not going to sit well. They have a pretty good lifestyle. They should spend more on their militaries and more on their defense, but what they're talking about is kind of rivaling the United States. Oh, by the way, to the people that are talking about the United Kingdom, especially the Canadian politician, I forget her name, that thinks that they could be protected from the United States by Britain's nuclear umbrella. Did you know that Great Britain's nuclear arsenal, its rockets, its missiles are owned by the United States and they rent them from us? I'm not joking. That was shocking to find out. Great Britain rents its ballistic missiles from the United States. They pay rent to it, really. Okay. They only have like 4 submarines or something like that, and only one is on patrol at any given time. I've been reading about this, and it's just shaking my head. These people are worse than Don Quixote. At least he had a horse and somebody that would obey his orders. This is really almost comical. I don't know. It could be a brain virus, something in the water. You know, some of the cheeses they sell in Europe are illegal in the United States. They're considered bacteria-filled too much. Might be that, but this is nuts. I think that NATO is done. I think the U.S. has no choice but to pull out of that and let Europe kind of sort its stuff out. Let's just listen to George Washington's advice, shall we? And stay away. Let's make peace there with Ukraine and Russia and then just mind our own business and let these people go the way they want to go. Our ancestors left Europe for good reason, and it's being underscored with what we're seeing right now. Oh, the 2 astronauts stranded on the International Space Station because Boeing lost much of its engineering expertise. They finally made it back to Earth. Yep, they splashed down in the Gulf of Mexico. They had planned to be up there for only 8 days, but wound up staying for nearly 10 months. Elon Musk's SpaceX rescued them. He said shortly after they came back that he could have done it much earlier had the Biden administration just given his company the green light a lot sooner. Some reports are out that the 2 astronauts will only be getting about $5 extra for every day they spent stranded up there. And they're older. They're not your young, strong astronauts. That really took a toll on them. Bone loss and muscle loss. I don't know the details, of course, but that did not do well for their physical conditions. In spite of what people think, space is a very hostile place. Oh, and Boeing has won the contract to produce the next generation, the 6th-generation American fighter called the F-47. Okay, yeah, a lot of money will be spent on that, that's for sure. In Italy, the Pope is not dead. He's back at the Vatican and made a public appearance. Some will no doubt call his return to the Vatican a miracle, that he has survived his bout with pneumonia, but he obviously does not have much long for this world. He's wheelchair-bound, looks very, very sick. The political intrigue behind the Vatican walls must be running at a fever pitch, as it has been for centuries when a pope is on the way out and a new one is coming in. Don't think for a second that the Roman Catholic Church does not exert a significant amount of political power in the world. and in some places that you would never guess. And speaking of Italy, there is a supervolcano near Naples. It's millions of years old, and if it goes off, upwards of 500,000 people will literally be toast, as will the whole planet, because it'll go off and put a lot of dust into the atmosphere, and plants will die, and things will get cold, and, the usual stuff in such scenarios. So, what to do about it? The answer is nothing. Don't worry about it. If you don't have the ability to change something, and you certainly don't in this case, don't worry about it. It's just a distraction. It's great if you can sit there and worry about this and not having to worry about getting to work and paying bills and taking care of your kids. Just think of it as a real-life disaster movie that you'll be able to experience yourself without having to go to the theater. And speaking of disaster movies, or shall I say movie disasters, Snow White is finally out. Okay, who cares? Everyone knew it was going to suck. Oh, I have watched a few people who actually have gone and watched it not once but twice and done a review on it. Okay, yeah, who's surprised? And who goes to the movies anyways? You know me, I prefer the books. The special effects are always a lot better, and the writing is always a lot better. And actually, a good book costs a lot less than going to a bad movie, so why do that? The book lasts longer than the movie. Anyways, that overpaid actress, who I will not name, who played the once adored cinema icon of Snow White, you know her, the one who looks like Alexandria Cortez, only with smaller teeth. Well, she's a PR disaster all by herself. I feel sorry for her because my understanding is she's never been in a movie that's made money, that's turned a profit. I doubt she's going to be around much longer, since she has just gone out of her way to politicize things. I mean, she wishes our current president and all who supported him to suffer. That's a great way to sell movie tickets, Disney. So why don't we just forget Disney, please? I don't want to hear about it. I think it's just a distraction with all the other nastier stuff going on in the world that needs our attention. Let's just ignore Disney's movies and ignore their theme parks, too. I mean, Mickey Mouse is dead. Really. It's over. Walt Disney must be spinning around in his long-rumored cryogenic stasis chamber. It was a nice company while it lasted. It was an American institution. It was beautiful. When I was a kid, I went to Disney movies every summer. Did you know that they played these movies every summer for years? Because we didn't have video, we didn't have streaming and everything. The only time we got to see these movies was in the summertime. I actually got to see Song of the South a couple of times. That's a movie that they don't want to think of as existing anymore, but I saw Snow White a few times. I saw Fantasia. I saw a lot of fun Disney movies, and they were great. You could bring your kids to them. This one, not so much. The dwarfs, that's what they were called. They're supposed to be terrifying. It's like a horror movie. This is what you get when liberal Marxist wokeism takes over. You can't have nice things because they just smash them into the floor like the spoiled children they are. Rest in peace, Disney Studios. It was nice while it lasted. Now, I am going to leave you with some good news, at least some intriguing and entertaining news, and something that could give you a ray of hope. Everybody knows that there's been a lot of New Age ninny stuff about the Great Pyramids in Egypt for forever. I mean, all sorts of stories about them, what they were really all about. That's actually a place I've spent a lot of time studying, and there's a lot there. It's now been found out using LADAR, which is land radar, looking underneath the surface, that there are a series of structures underneath the pyramids. And this is not somebody who is seeing something in a psychic dream. This is hard science. There are several pylons going down into the earth. 2 kilometers, that's about a mile. and a larger structure at the bottom. That's what they've spotted. Now, there have been rumors, I shouldn't say rumors, but there's been teachings in various mystery schools for centuries that underneath the Great Pyramids is a massive storage of records, a library, a place where wisdom has been retained, whatever you want to call it. In Star Trek, they would have called it memory banks. Now, we don't know what these are, but that is a pretty impressive structure that goes very far under the earth that we can't get at too easily. There have been stories in just about every culture on this planet of a great flood, whether it be the Bible, Atlantis, or even the Indian tribes of Canadian British Columbia. But everybody in the world has heard of a time before this one where there was an advanced human civilization that lost it. This could be the first evidence of that. This could be the first solid evidence that the history of our world is very different from what we have thought and theorized and been able to prove. There's supposed to be a news conference later this week with far more detail being revealed, but I think this is probably the most important story that's come out in many decades, maybe a century or so. So this is something that we can look forward to. Maybe that's the way the world works, or the universe works, or the divine force over us works, is when they give us a lot of crap, they sometimes give us something very good to work with. So look for that. It's not a bunch of rumors. It's solid science. It's actually quite real. It's not made up. Whether it gets covered up, whether it gets stuck to the back of the news broadcasts, I don't know, but it's something to definitely watch. Please check out my Substack channel because I will be putting details of that up there in the coming days and weeks. You're going to start seeing more updates there because people have been asking me during the week for more details, and I will do my best to accommodate you in that regard. Maybe some of the mysteries of our world will finally be revealed to us, and that would make life worth living, and that would also put things into perspective so that many of us, whatever our political viewpoints, could put all that aside and just go back to the wonder of life and the world we live in and try to make it a better place. That's it for today. If you appreciate my work, please like, subscribe, and share. Share with your friends, share with your enemies. And please consider a paid subscription. I'm also up on Buy Me a Coffee and a few other places. I can be reached at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. I'm up on X. My handle there is MICCAMPEN. That's MICCAMPEN. I'm up on other social media platforms as well, not Facebook. This podcast originates at Substack. My address there is aureliancolumn.substack.com. Thank you for listening. Until we meet again, be good, be safe, be vigilant, and remember, Clown World and the Deep State must be destroyed. Good day.